Hello, it's been a bit. I was occupied this summer finishing a new book, so I was kind of away from YouTube for a little while. But today I'm going to talk about that story. So in the Behind the Books playlist, I'm going to discuss Revenant 6, the Korean Peninsula Anomaly, which is a 5-book serial that I have exclusively on Amazon. A couple years ago, I tried to release this on Kindle Vella, but I didn't really like the platform and there wasn't really a lot of readers on there. So after about 13 chapters, I abandoned it on there, took it down, and kept working on it, sort of not secretively, but I wasn't really mentioning it much in my social media and stuff. But this last summer, I've spent a lot more time on it, and it's now coming out. It actually the first episode releases today. It's actually 5 episodes. So first, if you like what you see here, you can leave a like. It really helps me reach more people. You can subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future about books or publishing or writing or the occult. You can hit the bell if you want those notifications. Okay, so I'm going to start with the synopsis, so I will read that now. Brace yourself for an intense sci-fi horror serial loaded with spiritual warfare and occult conspiracy. An American soldier on leave, a biochemist versed in the occult sciences, and a plucky high school student all have something in common. They survived the Korean Peninsula Anomaly. Together, they recount their harrowing experiences with bloodthirsty again-walkers and the diabolical corporation who engineered them. With each episode, a special agent's recording of eyewitness testimony brings the reader closer to answering these questions. Why is this happening on the Korean Peninsula? How does a controversial tech company and the world's religious orders connect? And lastly, what did the survivors sacrifice to stay alive? Before I get too far into the analysis and the behind the scenes of writing this, I'm going to read the preface because I think it really encapsulates the background of the serial. I'll refrain from naming it, but a certain pandemic largely inspired this horror serial. Its roots lie deeper, however, influenced by other touchstones in my life. A few brushes with death, some unexplained religious experiences, and many items of media that have inspired me over the years. First, I want to acknowledge the obvious contribution of the film Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. I had seen the box art in countless bargain video bins as a teenager, and it captivated me with its uncanny black and white image of that pallid girl with darkened rings around her eyes. I finally caught it on late night television during my freshman year of high school. It's an understatement to say the film horrified me beyond expectations. The dread haunted me for several weeks, and it still makes me uneasy even today. Soon after, I discovered Robert R. McCammon's novels The Night Boat and They Thirst. Books about zombies and vampires, yes, but stories truly about solitary anxiety and the inevitability of doom. I read these while working late as a projectionist at a movie theater. The loneliness of my job in an empty booth, monitoring projectors, and the vastness of the shadowy chamber made me understand that fear is absolutely a product of the imagination. Through these books, I came to understand that irrational anxiety is the cornerstone for good horror. Moreover, authors like H.P. Lovecraft, M.R. James, Arthur Machen, and Shirley Jackson also represent terror in their horror stories through alienation, emptiness, paranoia, claustrophobia, panic, and unseen threats lurking in the dark. And of course, Stephen King and Clive Barker perfected these tropes. When reading horror fiction, it's easy to see why these are some masters. In my adulthood, other inspirations have come from varied places. What's left ambiguous often chills us to the bone, as demonstrated by auteur filmmakers John Carpenter and David Lynch. The Italian giallo horror films of Dario Argento, Mario Bava, and Lucio Fulci have taught me that psychological eroticism creates a disconcerting atmosphere. Some other films about zombies have influenced this work, including Dawn of the Dead, Shockwaves, Plague of the Zombies, and Zombie 2. The British documentary Woodlands, Dark and Days Bewitched, A History of Folk Horror examines how present-day society is still affected by primeval fears and pagan customs, and the possibility of reverting to a primitive state. All these artists and works have contributed to the story in countless ways. These days, most of my fears come from religious and existential questions, some brought about by the pandemic. What happens after we die? Does something exist beyond this world, or is it benevolent or immoral? If the Creator is compassionate, how come we still suffer? True dread comes to me when thinking of these questions. Through this religious lens, Richard Matheson's I Am Legend continues to speak to me despite having read it years ago. What happens when you're truly alone? How do you fight those trying to steal your humanity? Once again, the pandemic intensified these fears, not of the illness itself, but more of the irrationality of the mob. I feared their eagerness to abandon logic in favor of emotion. I feared life as one among many. These themes Matheson addresses in his work, and I've also included them here. Lastly, I can never repay the enormous debt I owe to Philip K. Dick. His stories delve into identity and expose the false reality of our world. His hefty 900-page collection of letters and journal entries, titled The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, illustrates his struggles with religious experience in great detail, and it continues to inspire my own investigations into Gnostic philosophy and the mysteries that lie there. Okay, so like I mentioned, I started writing this during the pandemic, and a lot of it wasn't the fear of the actual thing, although there was some of that, but it was really seeing what happened to society as this unfolded, and the questions that kind of posed. I mean, every person sort of reacted differently, and I think there was a lot of irrational fear going on and desperation. So that kind of inspired me to take this on, although I knew it would be a challenge because it's a kind of controversial topic, and I thought the best way to do it would be to wrap it into a sort of zombie story, although in my story they're not really zombies per se, they're something a bit different. But the seed of this came about my first year of Korea, actually, way back in 2009. I was chatting with someone, another person that just got here. We were very green to Korea. And we had found out that on the peninsula, you're not allowed to have a firearm unless you have it registered with the police. You have to actually have it at the police station. So there aren't really many weapons here, and I thought that was very interesting, because if there was ever, the possibility of an invasion or a zombie apocalypse or something, that it would be very hard to defend yourself. And that actually intrigued me a lot. Not too long after that, I saw Train to Busan, and I think that's an excellent movie, but my serial is nothing like that story. Yes, they're both set in Korea, but I examined Korean culture a lot more, and being a foreigner in Korean culture. And although I like that movie, I think it's more of an action adventure, where mine is a bit of more of a mood piece, something more claustrophobic and maybe a bit on the esoteric side. But one of the things I mentioned in the preface is John Carpenter. I really think my work is highly inspired by him, especially for this story. I think The Thing and The Fog, those two in particular, I really got a lot from. I've continued to. I've seen those movies a long time ago, when I was in my early to late teens, I guess. So the one thing that I really love about his movies is the atmosphere, and this sort of feeling of dread and what's left unseen, and the paranoia, and the mystery of what's going on, which I definitely think influenced this work. And the image of the ghosts in the fog, I guess that's a minor spoiler. The images of the ghosts in the fog, sort of coming out of the fog and their glowing eyes, that's always stuck with me. It's such a simple effect, but it creates so much mystery, and it's so disconcerting that I think it just really works. It's very effective. So obviously I've ripped that off a little bit for mine. But also the body horror aspect of the thing, I think, really comes into play here, especially the paranoia of not knowing who has it, or what the different intentions are of the different characters. And many of them are more than what meets the eye. And Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, I mentioned that too, but not the films. I mean, I like the films, but they're missing a quality that the book has. The book is amazing. If you've never read it, you should read it. It's a really, really great book. But it focuses on the isolation and the mental fortitude of going against the majority. There's a rawness to the story. I actually reread it during the pandemic. It's my second time reading it, and it's actually quite eerie how much it resonates in that experience, I think. And I think it's a very clean narrative, and as a writer, I appreciate that. It's one reason I chose to do this story as an interview format, which it sort of recounts the experience of the survivors. In I Am Legend, he's sort of talking about, it's like his journal or his diary about how he's surviving, and I think that really draws you in. And obviously, I mentioned this also, Philip K. Dick. I adore all of his work, everything I've ever read, but the exegesis is a different level of entry into his work. I read it years ago while I was in college, but I've been flipping back into it during the pandemic and reacquainting myself with a lot of it. I mean, it's 900 pages, so it's very long. But it's quite enigmatic, and it really has a very deep investigation into religion and spiritual experience, but specifically Gnostic thought, which is a big part of this book, because it's something I've been researching and sort of struggling with for the last probably 3 or 4 years. But it's I should say that in his books he's always sort of talking about reality and what reality is on the surface. And in Gnostic thought, there's this sort of illusion at play between what they call the demiurge, who is the creator of what we see as the material universe, but the demiurge is not the actual God. The actual God is kind of above the demiurge, and we very rarely touch that spiritual light of the actual God. We are kind of fooled by the demiurge into thinking that he is the God. That's what they say in Gnostic thought, and Philip K. Dick goes over this in great detail. And I've also examined it a bit in this book, because one of the characters is kind of versed in this religion and occult thought. So I'm going to start quickly with the main characters, just to give you kind of an idea of what I'm going after here. So there are 3 survivors in the zombie apocalypse here, if you want to call it that. In the book they call it Anomaly. But the first one is Shin Sumi, and she is a jaded high school student. And she's the realist of the group. And she has her own group, a bunch of other high school students that she's trying to save. But she is actually a Korean American, what they call Kyopo in Korea. And she had lived in America for a long time, but she recently, maybe a year ago, came back to Korea. So she's got this kind of like almost foreign perspective, but she still understands Korea quite well. So she's kind of struggling with all of that as the story unfolds. And the second person character is Private Tyler Allensworth, and he's sort of a composite of soldiers that I've met out here. I've met many over the years, and he's kind of the idealist. I'm trying to get sort of the different perspectives of the anomaly through the viewpoint of the people. So he's the idealist, and he's got his own group, a few soldiers, and some people he meets in a bar, actually. And the third is Dr. Susan Topley Sayer, and she is a biochemist that teaches and works at KAIST in Daejeon, which is a scientific college, I guess, science college. But she is sort of the entry into the scientific and the spiritual, sort of the rational and the irrational. And most of the Gnostic thought comes from her, although the other two touch on it, but not with the knowledge that she has. And the final sort of cog in this is the agent, the special agent Ayers, who is the person interviewing them, and he is the skeptic because he didn't experience these things. He's just getting their account, and he's trying to sort of cut holes into their testimony. So this is a horror book, but it's actually more of a spiritual allegory, sort of a spiritual warfare story. And it tries to sort of unravel the deepest layers of human behavior and existence, I guess, and how we cope with things. There's a definite struggle between light and darkness, with good and evil, I guess. But it's really about maintaining resolve and maintaining your humanity when society becomes irrational. And I just think that the challenge of writing it was trying to articulate all my feelings that I had during the pandemic, which were innumerable. There were a lot of betrayals. There were a lot of, I don't want to say taking of sides, but that's how it kind of felt at the time. And I think that kind of experience should not be a taking of sides. It should be an analysis of what's going on, and the more that people share what they're experiencing or feeling or what they've read or they've researched, the more that we can understand it. But a lot of that wasn't actually happening, and there was a lot of false information coming out through the media and just a lot of disparate views of what was actually happening. And I think that while writing this, I had to do sort of a deep dive into technology and where science is right now and where it's going. And a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of things, a lot of scientific, like nanotechnology and things like that, are way further ahead than what we kind of think. I read a lot of peer-reviewed papers, scientific papers, to try to wrap my head around that technology. And what they show in the movies is like maybe 20 years behind what is actually happening at this time. And I really, really go deep into that in the book, in the story, trying to sort it out, because I think it's important for all of us, really. It's a technology that is a bit scary and also easy to use covertly, I guess. So that's one thing I try to, it's like sort of cautionary tale, I think, in some ways. But, you know, other things that I wanted to address here is this idea, you know, I'm a very I see myself as a very spiritual person, and I come in contact with a lot of people that don't believe in any kind of religious or spiritual fabric to reality, and I've often gotten in debates with people about it. These days I don't really talk about it too much in public, but before, maybe 10 years ago, I would try to not influence people, but if they would direct their views to me, I would try to maybe challenge their thought process to see if they could maybe open their eyes and see a little bit more of what the possibilities of the universe are or could be. But yeah, I don't know. Some people are more open-minded than others, and you can lead a fish to water, or what do they say? You can lead a fish to water, but you can't make them drink, or an animal to water, deer to water, something like that. So the thing that I did with this story in talking about that, or referring to that, is that I wanted to kind of lay down my actual spiritual beliefs, which I've done in little sprinkles here and there in other books, but I wanted to kind of take it apart and examine it under this sort of facade of a zombie book and show a level of my awareness that a lot of people don't know, I guess. And I also wanted to understand it better, so I had to do a lot of research and really wrap my head around what I truly believe. So in that way, I think it's been a success. But the writing process has been fairly smooth, actually, compared to many of my other works. I finished the first draft in 1 month, which is quite fast for me. And over the summer, I've done the second draft, which I'd say was about 3 weeks, which is also quite fast. So it hasn't been like a slog or anything, but I think it's one of those things that, maybe on one level, as a person that likes zombie books or horror books, you'll like it. But I also think it works as a spiritual allegory and just a story about people struggling with their beliefs amidst a catastrophe. So I'm going to leave you with this quote by Philip K. Dick. It's in the epigraph of the book. And he says, "I had to experience the world as totally hostile before its hold over me could be broken." And I think that's how I feel, actually, quite concisely. And I think that is a big I don't want to say question, because it's not a question, but it's a question that is posed to people about the hostility of others and the world, and what it does to sort of take you out of it or come to a realization of the true nature of people. So I'm going to give you a few final questions to ponder, and you can comment if you have any answers to these questions. But here they are. What if the reality we believe to be the true reality is merely an illusion? So if you have any kind of comments about that, you can leave those down below. And what if true reality is hidden behind a wall of suffering? And, perhaps behind the hostile wall, there is some kind of peace, and we just need to find a way to get there. But that's all I got. If you want to take a look at this book, the link is in the description. It is actually, like I said, a serial. So there's actually 5 episodes. The first one is out today, and the rest will be coming out in the following weeks up until the middle of October, just before Halloween. And if you like it, or if you don't like it, any kind of review of the book, of the first episode, would be very valuable to me as a writer, because all reviews help. They help other people see what they're getting into. They help sell the book. So that would be great if you could do that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and you can like and subscribe if you want. I really need more subs. As you can see, I don't have too many subs, but I'm trying. So anyway, if you want to do that, you can subscribe, and I will talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.